Imagine you're getting punched in the face for a living and still underpaid. Now imagine your boss controls the ring, the gloves, the crowd, and your paycheck. That ain't a fight, that's a monopoly. But after nearly a decade of court battles, UFC fighters just scored a $375 million, 0 cents legal win. No belts changed hands, but some bank accounts did. So what happened? Why were UFC fighters suing their own employer? And did Dana White flinch or just cut a check and keep it pushing? Reggie Cross, I am the host of the Behind the Lines, where we don't just watch the fight, we break down the business behind it. Let's get into this. Let's rewind to 2014. The McGregor era was just heating up. Ronda Rousey was breaking arms and pay-per-view records. And behind the scenes, some fighters were quietly lawyering up. Why? Because the UFC wasn't just a promotion, it was the promotion. Like the only food truck in town charging $40, 0 cents for burnt tacos and saying, where else you gonna go? The lawsuit claimed UFC abused its monopoly by locking fighters into restrictive contracts, controlling sponsorships and fight options, and freezing out competition so other promotions couldn't grow. The legal term, monopsony. The real world term, you fight when we say how we say and for as much or as little as we say. Now, one fighter filing a lawsuit, that's a jab, but a class action, that's a combo. So a group of fighters teamed up like an Avenger-style roster if Iron Man needed a mouth guard. Over 1,200 fighters joined this class action suit, covering fights between 2010 and 2017. If you threw a punch in the octagon during that time, congrats, you were part of the rebellion. Lead plaintiffs included Kung Lee, John Fitch, and Nate Quarry. They were names that knew what it felt like to climb the rankings and still get nickel and dimed.
What we're saying is that the UFC has monopolized and monopsonized the sport.
In 2023, the court said, yeah, this is a legit class, let's proceed. That was like a ref giving the go-ahead for round one. Now, the question wasn't if UFC was the only game in town, it was, did they abuse that power to crush fighter pay and limit choices? That's when the numbers started flying, and so did the drama.
It's like something that like the UFC made just to like crush all these other guys.
At first, UFC offered $335 million, 0 cents to settle. Like someone tossing hush money after stepping on your dog. The court said, nah, not enough. So the final number landed at $375 million, approved in early 2025. It's the 7th largest antitrust labor settlement in US history. To put that in UFC terms, is 75 Conor McGregor fights or about 8,000 bonuses that should have been fight of the night. So what does that mean for the fighters? Most are getting between $50,000 and $300,000, not generational wealth, but for a lot of these guys, it's the payday they were supposed to get years ago. One former middleweight said he's using it to finally pay off medical bills from the fight that ended his career. Another, down payment on a gym. But hold up, this ain't just about money, it's about legacy and leverage. This was never just about back pay. This was about breaking the UFC's grip on the entire system. Right now, UFC fighters are independent contractors who can't work anywhere else, wear what they want, or even negotiate properly without being frozen out. Compare that to boxers who get real promotional freedom, sponsorship flexibility, and actual bidding wars for their talent. The UFC system, it's like being an Uber driver who can't drive for Lyft and the app fines you for wearing the wrong shoes. This lawsuit cracked the door open. It didn't break it off the hinges, but the next suit covering fighters from 2017 to now, that might change everything from how contracts are written to how fighters are classified legally. But don't worry, Dana White's still rich. And the UFC, they might have lost a round, but they ain't down for the count. So how did the UFC react? Publicly, they said, we admit no wrongdoing. but here's a mountain of money. Also, our stock's up 7%. Thanks for the press. Fans, mixed reactions. Some said, finally. Others said, that's it. They got off easy. TKO Group Holdings, the company that now owns UFC and WWE, basically treated it like a line item on a spreadsheet. Write the check, move on. But here's the thing, even if the UFC isn't forced to change their contracts yet, fighters now have a blueprint. This lawsuit showed that the octagon isn't just a cage, it's a business model. And like any business, if it's shady, someone's eventually gonna file paperwork. Now, let's talk real quick about what's next and why you might wanna keep your popcorn ready. All right, so we got a big payday and a historic win. But before anybody pops the champagne or an ACL in the training room, this was just the first case. There's still one more card on the table. The next lawsuit, that's the Johnson case. It covers the fighters from 2017 to now. That's the generation after Conor's big rise, the era of Ngannou, Masvidal, Covington, Shevchenko, O'Malley, you know, the TikTok generation of violence. This lawsuit's got teeth and stakes. If it goes the distance and doesn't settle early, it could lead to structural changes in how the UFC does business. And I'm not talking about superficial stuff like fighter NFTs or adding AI commentary, though God help us, that's probably coming. I'm talking about court-ordered changes like stripping those long-term exclusive contracts, letting fighters shop around for better offers, reclassifying fighters as employees instead of independent contractors who can't even wear their own gear. If this case hits like the first one did, the whole MMA ecosystem could shift. Bellator, PFL, maybe even BKFC gets to draft the top 10 welterweight without needing a burner phone and a fake passport. It's still early though. Think of it like round one in a 5-round war. Both sides are feeling each other out. The UFC's lawyers are playing defense and the fighters are hoping this time somebody lands the takedown that changes everything. So what should we be watching for next? Court rulings in late 2025 or 2026, potential settlements, and whether the UFC decides to tweak contracts proactively just to avoid another 400 million, my bad, because once fighters realize they have leverage, that's when it stops being a monopoly and starts being a negotiation. So yeah, 375 mil down, but don't blink, the real shakeup might still be on the way. So here we are. One of the most dominant sports organizations on earth just got hit with a $375 million wake-up call. For the UFC, it's a check they can afford. But for fighters, it's about more than money. It's about dignity, choice, and finally getting to see their labor years of blood, sweat, concussions, and cauliflower ears respected. Yes, I think it's not that it's a moment. It's easy to forget. Behind the lights and title fights, there's a business machine running 24/7. And sometimes that machine needs a reset. This lawsuit won't fix everything. It won't stop terrible judging or Dana White yelling at reporters or your favorite fighter getting cut after one loss in Brazil, but it cracked the cage just enough for the next fighter to slip through. So if you've been with me for the full breakdown, salute. I'm Reggie Cross, and this is Behind the Lines. If you're feeling the vibe, hit that subscribe. Drop a take in the comments. Who do you think wins the next round? Fighters with leverage or the UFC with its billion-dollar playbook? Either way, I'll be here calling it like I see it. No Dana filter. Remember, hype fades, legacy don't. Catch you in the next one.
745